Mm. Um, it's to do with events. So all of those different things that go on in school, whether that is start of a new term or whether it's a special event that goes on, and how we can actually make sure students are included without all of the stress that goes with it, he said. So jump to a different view and we'll have a look. Here's my first slide. So this is going out in January, and we've just had Christmas, we've just had all of those things going on in school. And I imagine some of you towards the end of term were thinking, just get me out of here. I've had enough now. And I would imagine some of your students were probably feeling the same. Um, it's incredibly stressful when we have lots of events going on. I think secondary schools are a little bit more business as usual. Whereas primary schools, we tend to have church visit or nativity plays and Santa Claus coming to visit and the Christmas afternoon party and all of those things going on. And you're going to watch other classes' nativity plays and the rehearsals that go with that and the Christmas carols and the excitement anyway of building up to a big event. So it can be incredibly dysregulating for students, but it can also be dysregulating for adults as well. Well, I certainly know that when I first started teaching, and I trained as a secondary science teacher, so I never really expected to be involved in whole school type events. But my first couple of years, my first 5 years, in fact, I taught in the middle school system. So I had years 5, 6, 7, and 8, and we operated as a secondary school model. So we had specialists teaching subjects, but we had a primary school kind of approach to things. So I had the same class of students for all foundation subjects, for example. And that meant it came as a little bit of a shock to me at the end of the first year when I'd got my tutor group and or my form group as they were called, and it was PE, and I was expected to participate in sports day. Now I absolutely detest PE and sports from the bottom of my soles, of my shoes, right the way up to the tips and roots of my hair. I hate it. And the thought of having to participate in a sports day, even as a member of staff supervising, was incredibly difficult. And I flung on my way through the first one, I think, and the second one I actually had a job interview, so I managed to miss it. The third one, I remember what happened. I think I did do that one. Fourth one, I remember, and the fifth one I had a job interview as well. I always managed to time job interviews quite well. Well, actually, the fourth one I was ill. There we go. So you can really get that there's something going on that I'm finding it traumatic, and it's to do with all of those things that are changing. I haven't got predictability. My children are not necessarily in school uniform, so it means that I personally really struggle to recognise them. Um, Teaching staff are doing different things. They might be behaving a bit differently. I'm expected to do something that I only do once a year that I don't really understand how to do. And those first couple of years being given instructions was like, oh, okay. I'm going to flap about a bit. You haven't always got a role model to go with. And if I'm like that as an adult, how does it feel for a child? A child who perhaps struggles with their regulation. So, a non neurotypical child. So, we really need to think about these things with a bit of a wider lens. And sometimes when our staff are pulling the face at Christmas jumper day or whatever it is that they're being asked to do, thinking, actually, you know what? I kind of get where you're coming from. I get that not everybody, it's not going to be their cup of tea. Why does it feel hard? So I've put down 4 reasons on there. I've put that, routines loosen, so we don't necessarily have registration at the same time, lunches might move, that rhythm of the school day where the bell rings and you do something and whatever else, it kind of disappears, and the predictability of everything sort of drifts away, and it becomes really, really hard to almost keep a measure of time for yourselves. So I mean, I really struggle now because I don't work in a school. I've spent pretty much the whole of my school career with a bell ringing every 50 minutes, even in a primary school. So it's quite difficult when you come away from that because you almost use it as your timekeeper. I've got my own personal biological clock going on, obviously, but it really does help you to work out what the time is. And to be fair, I've just had to glance at the clock on the computer screen because it's a bit dark here today and it's raining and it's I don't really know what time it is. What time is it? So I've had to check. Whereas normally, bells would have rung, oh, we're on third lesson, it's break time, oh, it's 11 o'clock or whatever the time is. So once we start doing something different, we lose track of that. And it could be even more confusing in the fact that most schools don't turn off their normal bells. So we're still listening to the normal bell, but we're not changing our activity at that point. So it becomes really weird and disorientating. I've put there that sensory input might increase, it might also decrease, but we might have things like decorations are up, especially if it's Christmas. We might have strange music playing. We could be having an assembly with everybody rather than just a particular phase within the school. And we've just got this intensification of all those sensory overload things that can make us feel, ugh. And again, we might have dampened the sensory because we've put a Christmas tree up in the classroom with a load of decorations and it's absorbing some of the sound. So we've got those plushies out and all the rest of it, and it's absorbing the sound, and the classroom feels a bit more quiet. And we get to the last day of term, and the teacher really doesn't want to come in over the holidays and do this. So we're asked to pack it all away, and we help to pack away the Christmas so we can come back in January to a nice, clear classroom. And you suddenly hear that echo in there. You hear that deadness of the sound. So it can, again, change of sensory environment. It can have a massive impact. The lighting in the room will change. We know it changes over the seasons anyway, but maybe what we're doing and the way we're moving furniture and what we're putting in our classrooms and our display boards that we're putting up are having an impact on the lighting. Thinking about those, how we're laying out our tables, what are our corridors like? Has that giant Christmas tree, real Christmas tree that is in the hall, absolutely stinks of fir needles? Is that a sensory input that is too much for a student? And I know I'm talking about Christmas and it's kind of over and done with now, but that they are, we have lots of things going on throughout the whole school year. This one is a particularly sensory one that we can talk about. I've put there also that adult availability tends to drop in quote marks. So perhaps we've got staff who are covering events. Maybe they're going out to the Christmas Carol service and we need some extra legs to go and walk the kids up. Maybe we've got staff who are taking children on a school trip on a particular day, or they're involved in exams. I mean, secondary school, we pack everybody off to go and do the exams, and our students don't necessarily have their support in the classroom. Maybe they're taking part in rehearsals for things. So we get the nice magical experience of whatever it is we're planning, but all of those bits that go with it could also have an impact on our students. And those students who rely on co-regulation in order to prevent dysregulation may not have that adult available to them. Maybe that adult is trying to multitask. Maybe that adult is struggling themselves with the changes that are going on. And what we find is that our dysregulated students become dysregulated more quickly, or they become dysregulated more often, or sometimes they just don't come to school at all because they just can't cope with those changes. And the last one I've put on this slide is that the timetables tend to become what I'm going to call flexible. Fluid might be a better word. Um, and it generally means unpredictable. In other words, we might have a lesson that's shortened, or we might have an activity that overruns. One of my schools used to do what were called drop down days. Basically, you dropped the timetable, and it was a secondary school. So, in that secondary school, I then kept my form group. I had a form group, or I kept a group of students for the full day doing a drop down activity. And in our case, we used to use it for PSHE. So we would have particular topics come through, and sometimes I'd have to take them to the hall to go and participate in something. Maybe there'd be a carousel of activities between five of us, perhaps, or maybe it was, literally, I'd deliver something in the morning, they'd do something with it, they'd present a project in the afternoon, then there was this big celebration assembly where each year group would get together and show what they'd done. The unpredictability of that was horrid for me as a member of staff, but also for my students. So I generally took a group of SEN students who probably wouldn't have been able to cope in their main classrooms, and we were going to do something that was generally more predictable. But as soon as I'm taking them out of their classroom, as soon as I'm taking out of their normal timetable, it's unpredictable anyway. It's different. I've become fluid. I've got activities that might overrun because the glue hasn't set on something. I've got bells that are ringing that are indicating end of period one, but actually period one and period two are now smushed together anyway. So, no, you can't go for your toilet break right now because everybody else will be going. Wait 5 minutes and then I'll let you go. Um, just so you're not in the corridor with everybody else, not denying them a toilet break. And the transitions between things become a little bit unclear. So, whereas we might have had a really predictable lesson structure, suddenly we've got this kind of free flow, fluid river kind of going on. And for those students that need to know what's coming next, that is a I've put there low level anxiety, but actually I think it's a high level anxiety. It's an anxiety that's present all day because from the second they walk in to the moment they leave, it's different. It's, in quote marks, wrong. It feels wrong. It was especially difficult, I have to say, when they decided to do drop down days in the middle of the week. Drop down days on a Friday were not quite so bad because students had the Saturday, Sunday to reset. But if you did them midweek, let's say on a Wednesday, you still had Thursday, Friday as normal lessons to get through, and it was horrible. It was awful. Apart from the fact, as a member of staff, I used to struggle trying to remember what day of the week it was because I'd had a weird day the previous day. And I'm pretty sure my students felt the same because they all followed the wrong timetable. But also, it's that, oh, well, yesterday I was allowed to do this, and now today you're telling me I've got to go back to the rules that we had on Monday. I'm confused. So I really get why our students find these kinds of things quite difficult. Kind of reframing it for ourselves there, then, including our students in this, it's not creating a new need just because they're manifesting themselves and usually manifest as behavior, let's face it, doesn't mean that that need wasn't there previously. It just meant that it's now easier for us to see where their stress points are. So you wouldn't know that I struggled with sports day as an adult, but I was struggling and I generally employed avoidance techniques. So, can I go and take that? Or would you like me to sit in the office and man it and you can go out instead? I would do anything rather than go to that sports day. So, it wasn't that it was a new need, that need was always present in me. I just not want to be a part of that, and I find it very stressful, but that I was able to not participate in it before. And as soon as I'm required to participate in it, I am trying to avoid it. So, an avoidance technique in my case. Um, it can also expose where we are relying on stability. So, as soon as our routines disappear, as soon as that fluidity comes into there, we can see clearly which of our students need predictability, which of our students need to have that almost regimented system within schools. And I'm not saying that that means we have to cancel all drop down days and sports days and events and all the rest of it, but we really do need to think about how we plan for those students who need the predictability. How much of the predictability, I wanted to use a different word and I can't think of one. How much of the predictability can we keep in there for them to make it so that they are less anxious, so that they're less stressed, so that they're not going to build up this dysregulation? We need to recognize that that behavior reflects the environment. So if we've got a student who's usually absolutely fine, and then all of a sudden we've got the anxiety and the dysregulation, it's probably the environment, not the actual child themselves. It's not them, it's the context that's dictating what they're doing, is dictating their response. They're not making a poor choice. They genuinely are not choosing it. They just can't react any other way to it. And it isn't defiance. It isn't them being stubborn. It's them going, actually, no, this is too much. I'm up to here. I'm going to explode. I've had enough. Um, and I know that bottom one is planning for pressure is professional practice. It's a bit like Peter Piper and his pickled peppers. So we actually need to proactively plan for these things. And I've put there it's not pessimism. And the reason I've put that is I was asked to go on a school trip. I hate school trips because I get very, very travel sick, but also it's out of routine for me. But I was asked to go on a school trip to Manchester United, I believe it is, football stadium. And that meant getting on a coach with students, having a tour of the stadium, keeping a hold of them. They were year nine, I didn't particularly know them. And I sat in the meeting and I just kept coming up with the what ifs. And I was told I was pessimistic. I was not, making this a pleasant trip for everybody. I was being negative Nelly. Um, And I'm sitting there going, I'm not. I need to know so that we've planned for what will happen if. And although those things may not happen, I need to know what the plan is. And that was recognised. It was like, oh, yeah, okay, you're thinking about that. Oh, yeah, we'd forgotten we're taking such and they're on crutches. Mm, yeah, okay, so what's the accessibility like? Oh, I don't know, we haven't checked. Go and think about that. It's in the going back just before risk assessments were brought in. So it's really important. We're not being pessimistic when we start looking for the negatives in things. We're actually planning proactively to avoid those negative things happening. And I still do that now. I'm an over planner. I have to know the ins and outs of things so that I can plan for the next bit. And I found it very difficult when things change. Okay, the language. So the words we use can often carry a lot of weight here, and staff can often be overtired, especially if we're on an overnight school trip. We might be working at pace. We might have to be doing lots of other things at the same time, and we're also being reactive to situations. This is where my pessimism planning comes in. Um, but our pupils are relying on us quite heavily for our cues there. So We need to regulate ourselves. The cognitive load for our staff is very high when we're planning a different event. So there's no getting away from that. Yes, some staff really love planning for them and all the rest of it, but there's no getting past the fact that it's not part of normal daily practice, and therefore the cognitive load is going to be increased. So we need to make sure that we're recognizing that in our staff as well as our students. We need to also recognize that students are looking to us for our cues. So if they see that we're stressed and that we're not sure what's happening, they're going to play off that. So making sure that staff have got a clear plan, that they know what to do if something happens, that they can exude a confidence, even if they can't say it off the tip of their tongue, but they've got it on a planning sheet somewhere. And I don't just mean our teachers, I mean our TAs as well, and our parent volunteers, or anybody that's involved in the event. Um, we get very tempted when things start to go wrong to use negative language, so, or trigger defensive language. Um, Things like they're being naughty, they're being attention seeking, they're not listening, as opposed to trying to understand why that child is not doing what they should be doing for whatever reason. So we tend to notice that stress levels in our staff go up, and as their stress levels go up, their vocabulary control goes down, and they will start using words like this, which generally speaking we frown upon. And, you know, I don't think it's a case of disciplining the member of staff and going, you can't call them naughty, they're not naughty, but it's recognizing that that member of staff at the same time is as stressed as the student is. So we're we're not dismissing it, and we do need to have those words with them about actually they're not being naughty, the reason they're not attention seeking, the reason they're doing it is this. But we also need to recognize that they are filled up, they are also under pressure. And if we can have a consistent neutral language, then it does enable everybody to have those supportive responses to students that will help reduce anxiety, but also amongst ourselves as well. And it gives that predictability back. It gives us that, or it removes that fluidity between things. It gives us those ideas that kind of sit and permeate across everybody talking. Put here core vocabulary to get things right. So, just some ideas here of the sort of language that we're talking about. So, to do with sensory overload, we've got staff who may well say they're being disruptive or they're displaying poor behaviour, when actually what we want to be saying is, okay, their environment is overwhelming them. Is too much coming in at once. They're not sure how to process this. And their response to it isn't intentional, it's physiological. So, one of the reasons I said I don't like going on school coaches is because I get travel sick, but I'm also emetophobic, which means I cannot stand the thought of being sick myself. But you can guarantee that if somebody else is sick and I can either hear it or I can smell it or I can see it, and even thinking about it right now is making my stomach churn, I will start to retch. So that it's not intentional. I can try and do everything in the book. I can suck mints, I can sit on the newspaper, I can try and block it all out, but I have a physiological response to it. And that's, a really extreme example of it. But actually, I think it illustrates quite well what some of our students are going through. Yes, okay, they're not going to vomit, but what we are seeing is their behavioral response to an emotional overwhelm. So the sooner we can recognize that and stop saying, being poorly behaved or they're disrupting, as soon as we start to recognize those things, it's okay, what's the environmental trigger here? What's going on? But predictability, so they need to be more flexible, or they need to um, understand the restrictions. Actually, yeah, we would love some students to be a little bit more flexible, but flexibility is about predictability. So you can still have flexibility if you use predictability. In other words, a child knows what's coming next, not flexibility, unpredictability, which is where we're going to change things and the kid's got no idea why and no idea when and hasn't got a clue what's going on because they can't prepare themselves for it. Same applies to staff. Inclusive participation, so that's where staff say everybody's going to do the same thing. I do believe there is a place for this. So we might want everybody to have the same experience, but our pathway into that experience may well be different. And the example I like to use here is if I went to visit um, a National Trust building, very, a nice old building, and I'm going as myself, pulling up the stairs, etc. Usually, you walk in these places, there's a lovely grand staircase in front of you, and they usually go up the middle and they branch off to the right and the left. And we're going to meet in this room that's directly behind my head here. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to go around to get to it. And I go up those stairs and I have to make a choice. I can turn left or I can turn right. Does it matter which way I go? Not really. Okay? Both are going to get me to the same destination. But at the point of getting to the same destination, I've actually taken a different route to get. One of them went past a load of different statues and busts and those marble things that I'm always terrified of knocking off the shelf, and the other way goes past some rather haunted looking paintings. I got a slightly different experience on my way, but I've got to the room that was behind my head because I've gone up those stairs and I've chosen my path, left or right. I've got to the same destination. I've had this, I've got to the same endpoint, but I took a different route to get there. Now let's imagine I have broken both my legs and I'm in a wheelchair for the day. I think I might be in a wheelchair for a bit longer than a day if I'd broken both my legs, but there you go. And that means I can't go up this grand staircase. But there happens to be a servants' pulley system down some back corridor somewhere. And the National Trust staff say, "Oh, you can fit the wheelchair in there. Don't worry, we'll put you in there." They wheel me up. So they wheel me off down some old, narrow corridor that nobody else ever goes down. So there's no artifacts on display. Just got these blank walls, plywood either side to protect the originals. And they put me in this service elevator and they pull the pulleys. Yes, I've definitely had an experience there. And I come out at the top and then I was back along the plywood corridors and I come into the room everybody else is in through a different door. I've got there via an entirely different route, but I didn't get the experience on the route. So we need to think about when we're talking inclusive participation, we've got the staircase, we've got the left route past the busts and the right route past the paintings. They're both giving an experience, but I've also got the dingy corridor and the service lift, which really didn't give me the same experience. I've got to the same destination, but I kind of bypassed all of the knowledge on the way. So, what can we do to make sure that that student or me in the wheelchair actually gets that part of the experience as well? And that might have been, do I get to look through the guidebook? Can somebody bring me one of the busts? Can I sit at the bottom of the stairs and look up at some of the paintings? Somebody carry me up? Is there one of those chair things that goes up the stairs? Stand the stair lift. What could I have had that allows me to have a similar experience and that I get to the same destination, but doesn't remove things from me. There's a long way of saying there's always different routes to get to the same place. Just make sure that the experience on the route is equitable. Okay. Emotional regulation. They should calm themselves down. They should control themselves. We borrow from the adults. If the adults are shouting at us, we're going to shout back. If adults are calm and regulated, then our students are more likely to regulate too. So somebody who's very calm and very almost passive, I suppose, is going to have far more impact on a student than somebody who's looking absolutely terrified of the fact that they think everybody's going to go running off, or that something disastrous is about to happen, or they're pulling their hair out, or they're counting everybody every 20 seconds out loud. Put here a three lens planning framework, that's simply a name to call it. So, when deciding what to keep, to adapt, or to let go of, I've got these three lenses that you could look through. So, inclusion, is this genuinely going to allow every pupil to access it meaningfully, or is it going to create some barriers for some and benefit others? Can we genuinely include everybody? Could we look at it through a well-being lens? So, is this activity going to leave our staff feeling better or worse? Does it deplete or restore our capacity? And I think sometimes, certainly at the end of term, our teaching staff capacity can definitely get depleted. And is it worth it? Is it, yeah, okay, we're going to give the children this amazing experience, and a lot of us will go out of our way to do that. But is it genuinely worth it for pupils from a learning perspective and for the staff and their well-being? And then the manageability. So is the workload proportionate to that actual benefit? And are we stretching resources too thin for whatever the outcome is going to be? So if we are kind of saying, I'm not really sure about some of these things, it's really worth questioning whether that activity benefits our community. Um, and I don't mean the community that we had 10 years ago when we started this activity, but the community that you have now. Does it really benefit you? Or do you need to look at doing something different? Again, just to give an example, I know a lot of schools stopped doing visits to the pantomime. And they now have the pantomime come to the school. And that was partly to do with transport costs, it was partly to do with getting volunteers and counting the kids' heads 56,000 times, partly to do with allergies. The costs of actually attending that it's actually cheaper to have a company come in and deliver it in their school, but also it helps with that dysregulation of quite a few of their students. And that model now fits, or now fitted better for their students. However, what they're now finding is that some of their students have gone through reception to year six, let's say, and they've never actually been out of their school environment on a school trip as such. So they might have walked somewhere in the local community, but they've never actually taken them to somewhere. So those children have never been to a theatre or a cinema or something like that. And they're now thinking, actually, our community is now not best well served by this. We need to put some of those cultural expectations back. Cultural expectation was the wrong phrase. Sure, you all knew what I meant. Okay, using that framework, then, so if you meet all three criteria, then it is inclusive, it is going to support well-being, it is manageable, then it's worth keeping it. It's worth protecting it, it's worth celebrating it. Some of them you might need a bit of light adaptation, so maybe it needs to be shorter, maybe we need some different spaces, maybe we need some flexible participation. What can we do? Those light changes, reasonable adjustments, whatever you want to call them, that would allow others to participate that may otherwise have barriers in their way. Some of them may no longer serve us, so then there's no purpose to them anymore. So It's not a failure to get rid of them. It might have some people whinge, but it's it's almost a case of going, actually, this is no longer appropriate. It's not suitable for us. Let's do something different. And then, creating a calmer alternative. So once we've got rid of something, what could we put in its place? So, is it something like a school zoo coming to the school, or do we need to take them out to the zoo? Is it going to be an author visit? Is it going to be an online author visit rather than them actually having to come into the school? Again, online things, we really embraced them 5 years ago, and we've now kind of drifted back into our old patterns again, but actually, we know a lot of students engage are better with some of that online material. So can we mix and match some of these things? So really looking at those. Unstructured time is not neutral time. I always talk about break times and lunch times, and that they are unstructured times for students. And it's very often where we see lots and lots of their difficulties come to the fore. And I feel that special events in schools are pretty much the same. So whether it's an assembly or a rehearsal for something, wet play, bound to have a bit of that over the next couple of weeks, um, they can feel very unstructured to students. So they say they feel a bit out of sorts. They haven't got that anchor there to hold them in place. And those clear beginning, middle, and end to their day or their routine or their lesson or whatever it is has disappeared. And that unpredictability, that unstructured time, brings its anxiety with it. So they don't know what's coming next, or even if they've been told what's coming next, because it's not reinforced, it's not what they're used to, they forget it and they'll keep asking, so what we're doing next or what's going on next. And they usually then start to dysregulate. We see that as behavior, and that behavior could end up being disruptive or defiant, or they just can't cope at lunchtime and they go completely off the rails when actually it's a distress signal. They're going, oh, hold on a minute, I can't cope here. This is too much. There's too much going on. So how can we help them with that? Any visual anchors? So now and next boards, visual timetable for that event day, event week, whatever you've got going on. Any clear signals for the endings of things? Pretty much the same as you would do throughout a normal lesson. Just don't throw those things away just because we're doing a special event. If we're normally using a now and next board for a student, we need to use it during a special event as well, probably even more so, especially if it's a student who has previously relied on them and is now okay because we've got a classroom routine, but you're about to take them out the routine. They now need now and next board for this new kind of activity they're taking part in. Using calm, neutral language. So I notice you are finding this loud rather than you need to calm down. 'Cause I don't even know what calm down means when somebody says to me, calm down. What do you mean I'm calm? What do you actually mean by that? But I notice you're finding this loud. Would you like your ear defenders? But it brings it back to them and allows them to make choices. Keeping known adults nearby, so familiar face, co-regulation, their peers can do that as well. If we're calm, they're going to borrow some of that calmness from us as well, that co-regulation, and that really does help in an unfamiliar situation. And it's very often why schools will resort to asking parents to come on trips with particularly dysregulated students. So if we're going on a school trip, we might ask the parent of that child to come along, not always because we think that child's going to misbehave, but because we feel that that parent is more likely to be able to co regulate with that child and give the child the attention that they perhaps need at that point in time. Because let's face it, when we're out of our school classroom, we're out of our controlled environment, and we've got 30 of the little creatures running everywhere. Um, in creatures, you know what I mean. But you've got 30 of them wandering everywhere, and yes, we might have our 1 to 5 staff ratio, but we know that that one particular student is going to find this really, really difficult. Maybe they do need their parent there. Maybe they do need that one to one. Can't insist on that parent attending, though. Just to make that clear, Qualities Act, you would have to find some alternative way of accommodating them. Regulation before correction there as well. So making sure that we're meeting their emotional needs before we're trying to say, no, you can't do that, or you need to do this. Because if they're not regulated, they're not able to process what you're actually asking them to do. So we talk about regulation before education as well. You can't teach somebody unless they're regulated. It's the same here. You can't correct a behaviour whilst a child is in a dysregulated state. Our teaching assistants, so very often they're the first to notice when a child begins to struggle, usually because they're closer to them, they've got a slightly different relationship with them, and are they're in a good place to actually intervene early. It's one of the issues with when we steal all the TAs from the school to take on a school trip, that sometimes they're not the ones that know the children that are within that group. So needing to be really, really careful about who we choose and who they're working with. And hopefully, if you've got a small enough school, they do know those children, or they've had the chance to work with them previously. So looking for those subtle signs, are they withdrawing? Are they fidgeting? Is there tension in their face before things escalate? Adapting activities in the moment. So we may need to reduce whatever it is we're doing. So we're not going to do 30 minutes on brass rubbings. You're only going to do 20 minutes, and then we'll go and have a look at that over there. Giving them that movement break if they need it. Giving simplified instructions, especially if you're going to something where other individuals are perhaps delivering it. So whether that's an author that's come in, or whether it's the school zoo that comes to your school, or whether you've gone out to a museum and perhaps it's the museum archivist that's there. Sometimes they don't know your students. Or they're not going to know your students, and although many of them will have a teaching background and they will be aware of different needs, they're not always great at good old fashioned differentiation, if you like. They're not always good at adapting their own approach and their way. And let's face it, somebody who's absolutely passionate about astronomy that works at the local telescope um, isn't necessarily going to be somebody who can communicate with a group of children. They understand their own subject, doesn't necessarily mean that they can deliver content on their own subject. Giving alternative routes to participation, so that's a bit like my staircase thing. So, do we join in with just part of the activity? Could we engage from a different space? Sometimes sitting in the doorway can help rather than actually going into a completely unknown room. It can, just those different ways of actually approaching things. And then using some simple ready regulation tools. So having these things to hand. So fidget resources, quiet corner, identifying that before we go. What sensory tools have we got? What have we got available that we could use to distract a student perhaps who is feeling a bit dysregulated at that point in time? And the same thing applies, even in an in-school event. So if we've got sports day or something going on, our teaching assistants are very often involved in those as well. So have we, students that don't want to take part in it, have we got a quiet corner for them? In between races, have we got the fidget resources for them? What have we got that we can use? Just press the wrong button there. I've put staff well-being on here because that's also part of inclusion, and inclusion absolutely collapses when staff are exhausted. So we need to absolutely recognise that within anything that we're doing. And I do find that school events can be extremely triggering for some members of staff, especially if they're after school events as well, or weekend events. So Once we've got tired staff, we find that they lack the capacity for patience, so they might get a bit short tempered. They perhaps don't have flexibility within their own plans. Their emotional regulation may well go out of the window. And they're all things that we actually need if we want to be able to do things with our students well. So, small actions can help to support here, giving them a 10-minute break, giving them that quiet workspace, acknowledging their effort. It can be far more powerful than that promise of, well, you can all have a pizza when you've finished, or well, you can all have a duvet day that you can take next term. I don't really care about next term at the moment. I've got to get through today, and I'm struggling with today. So it's those things in the moment that really help. Clear communication, especially if it's something where one person is organising it and then we've got multiple staff that are delivering it. So, what are the expectations? What are the timings? If things have got to change, how is that going to be communicated? I've had events in the past where I've been told I've got 40 minutes to do something, and then it was changed to 30 minutes. But actually, the first part of what I was doing took 25 minutes to set up. So, trying to do the 15 minutes in 5 minutes was going to be impossible. And it was on a carousel, so it caused absolute chaos. I've had another event where they decided to throw an assembly in and the assembly overran. So the activity that we'd got planned for the afternoon had to be cut short. And because it was cut short, we didn't have it was a science experiment I was doing for this particular one. We didn't have time to actually do that experiment. We needed pretty much the full amount of time. I needed about 45 minutes to an hour, and I'd only got something like 30 minutes because they'd thrown this assembly in. And it was a case of scrambling around trying to find an appropriate replacement for it. But the problem was they actually hadn't communicated this to us. So on the day, we'd spent the morning setting up all of that practical equipment and all of that event equipment. And the students had had their lunch, and then after lunch, they'd hootled off to this assembly, and I'm standing in the lab waiting for them, thinking, they'll be here in a minute, be here in a minute, sure they'll be here in a minute. Sent somebody down to go and find out what was going on. Oh, they've gone to an assembly. Hmm, brilliant. When are they going to be out? Don't know. You go and find out. Find out. Oh, we'll be out in another 10 minutes. So this and informs me I've only got 30 minutes to do what I need to do. And I've got about 10 minutes before the kids are coming up to me, which is okay. I have no idea what I'm going to do now, and completely having to replan it on the spot. And yes, okay, we're teachers and we can do that, but it's really stressful and unfair, and can cause issues. I've put down there protecting time protects regulation. So, very often when we do school events, staff PPA time goes. And although that might get paid back at some point, if that event has a knock on impact on that person's PPA time, so that they haven't managed to plan something for whenever, we've got to acknowledge that. It's not fair to say, oh, well, I'll give you double time next week, when that means on Monday they've got to spend the whole weekend planning because they've got nothing for Monday morning. It's those kinds of things. Lunch break, break time, anything like that. Very often, again, I remember very clearly taking part in events where I would have to get into school early to set things up. So perhaps arriving at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, not finishing till 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and actually going through the whole day without a morning break, an afternoon break, school break, a lunch break, or even a wee break. So kind of holding that bladder all day as well, because it was absolutely full on and there was no opportunity at any point to drop one of those balls and go, I just need 1 minute or 2 minutes. Give me a second. There just wasn't that chance. And again, that can have a massive knock on impact. The Senko role, then, because it isn't necessarily our role to do all of those things, noticing any patterns before they escalate, both for our students and for our staff. So, which of these activities and events over time are consistently creating difficulties, and what can we proactively do to prevent that in the future? Slowing systems down deliberately. So, inserting pauses, making sure we've got those breaks in there for staff and for students, simplifying schedules, creating breathing space. Yes, okay, we might be having a drop down that's got 5 carousels, but maybe some of my students should be doing 3 of those carousels with 2 lots of something else. If we can put some predictability in there as well, so if they normally have their occupational therapist on Thursday afternoon, the event's taking place on Thursday afternoon, could they possibly still come out for their OT because that gives them their bit of predictability, or are they really going to miss out on something? Anticipate those pressure points, so assemblies, the transitions, all of those bits and pieces, and then planning for pressure, not perfection. So, yeah, we know there's going to be some hiccups. We need that pessimistic planning. We know that. It's not about flawless execution, though. It's about having that plan up our sleeve, what we're going to do if something goes wrong. My final thought there is inclusion will always be busy, but it doesn't have to be chaotic. And just referring back to all of those things, that end of term pressure, those festivities, the special events that we put on, they are inevitable. They're part of school life, they are memorable experiences. We should give children the opportunity to participate in them and staff, but they also stretch systems, they test our capacity, they expose where things might be a little bit more fragile, students and for staff. And we need to do our best with that proactive planning or pessimistic planning, whatever you want to call it, to try and make sure we've got those calm systems in place. So slow things down, communicate clearly, plan for the pressure points, and create the conditions that allow people to participate in a way that is meaningful to them as a student or as a member of staff. And that is essentially what inclusion is. It isn't about doing something different necessarily or doing something big. It's thinking about, okay, where's this going to go wrong? And what can I do to mitigate that? If it still goes wrong, it's okay because I've had to try at mitigating it. And acknowledging it's not always going to be perfect. It won't always be perfect. And that some children will still struggle with it, but we're giving them a chance and we're giving them an opportunity. So allow me to pick my other screen for a second. There we go. Bring me back on the board. Hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully it was useful for you. It's an interesting one to deliver in January because, of course, we've just had Christmas. But the reason I decided to deliver it now is because you're probably reflecting on all of those things that happened in the 3 weeks in run up to your seasonal break, thinking, oh, I've got to do this again next year. Hopefully, this has given you some way of thinking about, all right, we've got this event coming up, we've got parents' evening, I've got sports day, I've got a transition event, I've got drop down day, we've got whatever it is, children in need. That's November. We've got Easter. All of those Diwali, they're all coming to my head now. What are all of these events that we have in school that are different to a normal school day? And what can we put in place to support our students to have that experience in whatever way is meaningful to them, rather than excluding them from it because we haven't thought inclusively. Take care, everybody, and I will see you